Welcome to my presentation about the social license to operate in high-performance equestrian sport. I'd like to thank the University of Guelph for their invite to speak to you on this topic, which I believe is a critical conversation we need to have in order to future-proof elite-level equestrian pursuits. My name is Jodie Hartstone. I'm based in New Zealand and I've been riding horses all of my life, from my pony club days to working as a professional 3-day event groom at World Championships level before concentrating on dressage right up to international Grand Prix level. In the last 15 years or so, my focus has been on equitation science and, in particular, the application of learning theory. That's the science behind how horses learn. Through my association with Dr. Andrew McLean, I've been involved with the International Society for Equitation Science, where I've served several terms on the board as the practitioner representative. So what is social license to operate and why is it important in elite level horse sport? In a nutshell, social license to operate is the public's consent to do an activity. If enough of the general public view horse sport in a negative light, then they will have the power to end the use of horses in sport altogether. Many of us have grown up with horses and we'd simply hate to see an end to elite level horse sport, but at the end of the day, in order for horses to be exploited in some way, shape or form, and let's be honest, whether we like that term or not, that is what happens in sport, the public perception of all we do is what matters the most. We need to be able to view the sport from an outsider's perspective, and it is our responsibility as horse lovers to make changes to elite level sport if we want to be able to continue to use horses in this fashion. What kind of things do we need to be aware of that happen in elite level horse sports that may not sit well with the general public? What we as riders perceive as part and parcel of the goings on at a horse show may well be seen as animal abuse by others. Whose opinion on high-performance horse sport matters? Statements such as, "What would you know? Have you ever jumped that high?" Or, "I bet you couldn't ride one side of a gate on a windy day." These sort of statements are often used to counteract any claims of malpractice when a member of the horse riding community dares to speak up about the issues that the general public may find concerning. This is the attitude of horse people towards other horse people. We often dismiss their opinions because we deem that they're not as experienced as ourselves, as if the only people able to comment on elite level sport are those at the top of their game themselves. But people's opinions matter. Opinions from within the sport matter, whether they're an elite level rider or a pony clubber. And the people whose opinion matters the most are those of the public at large, who may never have even had the pleasure and privilege of touching or breathing in that amazing horsey smell, because these are the people that ultimately allow horses to be used for high-level competition. Throughout history, horses have played an integral role in the development of the world as we know it today. Our attitudes towards them have evolved alongside the roles they have played for us. In wartime, for instance, horses were revered for their bravery. When used in agriculture, horses were said to have a good work ethic. And in today's world, those using horses in sport will talk about the horse having a will to win. And as a pet or companion animal, we talk about our friendship and the bond our horse shares with us. A century ago, it was normal to treat horses as if they were non-sentient beings. The book Black Beauty by Anna Sewell, written in 1877, was well before its time and became an integral part in the changing of attitudes towards horses as living beings with feelings, albeit in an anthropomorphic way. Growing urbanization around the world has meant that increasing numbers of the world's population are naive to a life around nature, farming, and horses. In fact, only a tiny percentage of the world's population ride horses, but a huge percentage still admire and love horses. These people care about horses and other animals, and their voices matter when it comes to a social license to operate for horses in sport. We've all seen the images of the modern pentathlon from the Tokyo Olympics. Due to the public outrage that followed, the international governing body of modern pentathlon was left with no choice but to remove the use of horses from the sport after the Paris Olympics that are coming up next. Although many horse riders were relieved to see this outcome, it may well have opened the floodgates to further public scrutinisation of the use of horses in sport at this level. And yes, it was horrible to watch, but let's be honest, how is that what we saw at the Olympics any different from what we see on occasion in horse sport at the local club grounds? What I believe was most horrifying to horse people is that we were seeing it unfold in our lounge rooms and on our laptops where we knew everyone from all walks of life was watching. At regular horse shows, when this type of riding sometimes occurs, I believe we're more comfortable with it, as those of us there form some sort of circle of trust based on the outdated traditions and ingrained teachings of our youth. The FEI, or Federation Equestrian International, is the governing body in charge of the Olympic disciplines of eventing, show jumping and dressage, and they're also the governing body for para-dressage, carriage driving, reining, vaulting and endurance. In their rules and charter, it talks about maintaining the highest levels of equine welfare and ensuring fair play, saying it is imperative that horses are protected against overuse or abuse. They have an anti-doping global program for controlled medication, and there's also a code of conduct. I think it's important to note, though, that accepted practice with horses is not always good practice. There has been a shift away in recent times from what was previously considered optimal horse welfare under the 5 freedoms model, which was really focused on good horse care, with the horse having food, shelter and a safe environment. But the focus is now shifting towards what animals require in terms of their innate needs to lead a quality of life, which includes lengthy daily foraging, equine company and the freedom to move. Top competition horses may be well cared for in the sense that they have warm rugs, clean water, deep bedding. Some even have a masseuse and a nutritionalist looking out for them. But more often than not, these horses are kept in isolation in a stall, unable to engage with other horses through wither scratching and touch, and they've got very limited ability to move and forage as they would have in a natural environment. Competition riders are often blinkered and their focus is solely on caring for the horse as a top athlete, often forgetting the quality of life aspect. I will personally never forget the day a friend brought their non-horsey cousin to my farm to see the horses I have here in New Zealand. The very first question he asked me was, to my horror, "Why are the horses in cages?" Which really got me thinking, is this how the public perceive the keeping of horses, in a stable or stall? Much work has been done over the past few decades about the enrichment of lives of zoo animals. It is no longer acceptable for many sectors of society that animals are kept in zoos for the pleasure of the public. Many zoos now play a critical role in the breeding and conservation of endangered species, and the enclosures the animals are kept in are much better suited to their mental and physical needs than they have been in the past. However, the way we think is normal to keep horses has not really progressed at the same rate. So what does the FEI say about good horse welfare? In their code of conduct, they talk about the general welfare of the horse, good horse management and training methods, good farriery, well-fitting tack, and transport that is safe for the horses. The horses must be fit to compete and in good health. There's rules against doping and medication and misuse of the aids of the rider. There's rules about mares being pregnant and being ridden in competition. And events must not prejudice good horse welfare. There's need for good surfaces and stabling with no extremes of weather, and all jumps and equipment must be safe. Horses must be treated humanely, with vets always in attendance, and education, urging all of those involved to be well educated when it comes to good horse welfare. But you'll see that most of what is considered welfare is more about good horse care, with very little, if no mention, of the horse's ethological, hardwired needs for companionship, freedom, and foraging. There is also no mention of the need to follow training methods that have been validated by the science of learning theory, which in itself can have major negative effects on the well-being of a horse. For sure, drug testing is important to ensure the welfare of competition horses and to eliminate drug cheats. But I do often feel that it's often somewhat of a red herring, deflecting away from the real issues, such as non-horse friendly training methods. A drug may appear in a horse's system through something as innocuous as a steward using a cream on their sore knee and then picking up a broom. Someone else then touching the same broom, shaking hands with the groom of the horse, and then the horse returning a positive swab. Medals have been stripped from horses and riders with such small traces of a drug in their system that it equates to something like a drop of water in an Olympic-sized swimming pool and could certainly never be seen as performance enhancing. So whilst testing for drugs is a good thing, it may actually deflect away from more pressing welfare issues. In an attempt to improve the public's perception of horses in high-level sport, the term happy athlete was taken on by the FEI in their rules for dressage some 20 or so years ago, and it remains in the rules to this day. However, some riders, trainers and judges become so focused on expressive movements and accuracy in the competition arena that they lose sight of what being a happy athlete really means. After all, the happy athlete is a very subjective thing to aim for, and the interpretation of this rule, whilst it's a good perception, it certainly has its disadvantages and can be misinterpreted very easily. For instance, if an FEI judge taking a clinic for other judges tells these judges that there must be no resistance in the mouth, many trainee judges may be under the impression that an open mouth should always be penalised. But if judges start to become overcritical on the mouth, then riders simply find a way to shut the horse's mouth. And that's what we certainly see in today's sport with an alarming trend for overly tight nosebands. The two qualities appreciated by the judges in the show ring the most are happiness and brilliance, but unfortunately these two factors don't often go hand in hand. Horses that seem happy in the show ring often lack brilliance and get scored down because of that, and horses that are brilliant in the show ring and induce the wow effect seem to be tense, nervous and spooky. If we demand more and more expression and extravagance in competition, then we are certainly going to push horses more, and the tension will become more obvious, not just for horse people, but for the general public. The FEI crowned two horses, Salianero and Rusty, as their top two happiest horses at the 2004 Olympics. However, both horses appeared to be quite spooky, so how can these horses be considered happy? For sure, fear is certainly not associated with harmony, happiness, steadiness and trust. So how can horses that freaked out in the show ring be labelled as happy? Here's a picture I took of a well-known international show jumper at a 5-star event in Ireland. I put this photo on my Facebook page amongst others I'd taken the same day. The social media outcry baying for the blood of the rider was quite intense. But should the blame be on the shoulders of the rider or directly on the governing bodies that allow this type of riding and this sort of gear on the horse? Will making this particular rider feel bad or making them lose their sponsors help the issues that we have with public perception of high-level equestrian sport? Or are we better to effect change with the governing bodies that allow this sort of thing to continue to happen? When looking at the FEI rulebook, there are many words that are used whose connotations can have serious negative welfare consequences for the horse. In the rulebook for show jumping, the word disobedience is used 51 times and has a whole article, that's number 219, dedicated to it. Labelling a horse's behaviour as disobedient implies that the horse knows what he is doing is wrong and that it's the horse's own fault. He is choosing to be that way. Science, however, tells us that the horse lacks a dorsolateral prefrontal cortex in the brain, which renders a horse incapable of plotting against his rider, and therefore the horse should always be a blameless participant in the competition and training arena. In the dressage rules, we find the word submission used many times to show that the horse is performing without resistance. Although the word submission is described in the rules as not meaning subordination, but rather an obedience that reveals itself in the presence of constant attention, willingness, and confidence, and in the whole behavior of the horse. There is talk of harmony, lightness, and ease of movements. However, there's no escaping the fact that using a word such as submission implies the rider being dominant over the horse, which is very dangerous territory indeed. Dominance theory in the training of animals should most definitely be discredited and replaced with more ethical methods. These terms really need updating for no other reason than to try and create a culture of partnership between rider and horse, with the horse's mental and physical abilities needing to be front and center. So how does one go about effecting change towards more horse-friendly practices in high levels of equestrian sport? Changing the rules is certainly not easy. National equestrian federations have only one opportunity annually to propose rule changes to the FEI. So in order to get a change at the top, one needs to start by gaining traction in their home country and hope that other nations will support the notion and follow suit. This is what's currently happening with rules surrounding noseband tightness in competition horses. For many years now, there's been a worrying trend across all disciplines, but particularly dressage, to have overly tightened nosebands. This is due in part to the fact that judges mark down any opening of the mouth as a sign of resistance from the horse. So the quickest fix for the rider is to simply force the horse's mouth to stay closed. The long-standing tradition that we've been taught of the two-finger rule that allows some movement under the noseband seems to have been discarded in the desire to win at all costs. When the FEI were confronted about the two-finger rule, their answer was that in order for fair play to ensue, a two-finger measurement would need to be standardized, and whose two fingers should be used. Professor Paul McGreevy from the University of Sydney took it upon himself to measure 80 different people's fingers and find the average width, and designed a taper gauge to be used to check noseband tightness. Some national federations have adopted this measuring system, but the FEI remains steadfast at this point in time. You'll see officials at the Olympics gear check placing their fingers on the side of the noseband, in the spot where the horse's cheekbone conveniently leaves a gap, which even with the tiniest nosebands, the steward can get a finger under. In this way, the FEI are seen to be caring about horse welfare, but in actual fact are perpetuating this cruel practice. For sure, one of the most disturbing practices for the general public to watch that is commonplace in elite level jumping is that whips are able to be used by riders as a form of attempted punishment. Even horse people themselves would be shocked and dismayed to see someone whipping a dog or any other animal. But with horses, whip use seems to be endemic. Some countries' animal welfare rules do not allow the use of a whip for punishment, but instead a whip may only be used to encourage a horse to move forward. But under FEI rules, the laws are more open, mentioning only that the whip must not be used more than 3 times in a row, nor on the head of the horse, nor to vent an athlete's temper. However, you are allowed to hold a horse at a fence after it has refused the jump and hit it 3 times when the horse is incapable of moving forward. Such actions from the rider are within the rules, but they go against the science of learning theory and for sure do not do jumping sports social license to operate any favours at all. So how did we stray so far? Most elite riders grew up loving and caring for horses, but in today's world of top competition, horses are commodities. They're traded for millions of dollars. There are pressures from sponsors and owners, often very high prize money on offer, and events such as the Grand Slam for eventing push riders to chase the glory of big titles, fame and fortune. Horses are flown from one venue to another across Europe and across the world, just like rock stars. It's a vortex that's very hard to get out of, and all the while, to the public at large, a horse is simply an animal that us humans are meant to be looking after and protecting from harm. One thing I hear a lot of equestrian riders say is that a horse must be happy and pain-free if it is winning at competitions. You just can't force a horse to do something it doesn't want to do. But of course, both of these sentiments are incorrect, and I know this from personal experience. The horse in this photo was an incredible stallion I once owned that tried his heart out for me and won several big international competitions whilst carrying what I now know was a very painful and ultimately life-ending injury. You see, horses are stoic. As prey animals, they're designed to show no sign of pain or weakness in order to survive. They do not yelp or bark when we kick them or jab them with spurs. We need to remember this, and just because we can do something with a horse, it doesn't mean we should do something with a horse. How can science help? Science can be used to prove what we are doing with horses is both ethical and evidence-based. The science of learning theory, for instance, can teach us how to use a whip correctly via negative reinforcement and not as a tool for punishment. Much scientific work has been undertaken recently on the positive and negative affective states in animals. It's now possible to actually prove that a horse is in a positive state of mind and not shut down or depressed. And the use of technology such as rein pressure gauges can measure and prove what's happening when a rider is interacting with a horse. And it's not always what we might have assumed is happening. The outrage we see from animal rights activists or even the general public when it comes to the handling, keeping and riding of horses is not always evidence-based. Science is one tool we can use to help prove that what we are doing with horses does not harm them. And conversely, science can be used to improve traditional practices that no longer fit with the current perception of what we should be doing with horses. Looking to the future, how can we improve the image of equestrian sport in the public eye? One answer is to start from within, at the grassroots, and that's precisely what's happened in Australia, where the Pony Club system has adopted a new syllabus focused not only on riding and horse care, but incorporating the science of learning theory and ethology, ensuring that the next generation of elite level riders will have a better grounding from the very beginning. Also, I think we should make riding more accessible and less elitist, with things like urban riding clubs being used so that everybody in the world can have access to the beauty that is horses. There should be prizes for horsemanship, best rider awards, not always the glory going to the person who has won at all costs. Positive images in mainstream media are needed that tell stories behind the scenes of the rider's bond with a horse. And we also need to try and avoid bad press, such as cocaine use, parties, and the elitism that can often go with a high-level equestrian sport. We need to ask ourselves, how long till our luck runs out? When it comes to social license, high-level equestrian sports have what I believe is a distinct advantage over the sport of horse racing. Spectators attending competitions such as the badminton horse trials are likely to be avid followers of horses and are normally horse owners and horse lovers themselves. The crowds at a racetrack, however, are often there for the social aspect, fashions in the field and so forth, and are often urbanized individuals with little or no equine knowledge. Often horse people are less likely to see aspects of horse welfare from a lens other than their own. This, I believe, puts racing even more under the scrutiny of the general public compared to, say, dressage or jumping. In closing, I think we need to consider how much we are blinkered by the traditions in equestrian sport. There are none so blind as those that will not see. We need to be on the cutting edge when it comes to science and research into horse welfare and training practices. The use of horses in sport needs to be transparent and worthy of the trust of the general public, and we must strive to always present the gold standard in horse care and welfare. I thank you for your time in listening to this presentation.